Welcome back to the last lecture of the Nators project. So it's now time to wrap it up, but before doing that, there are some small tweaks that we should make. And there are some final considerations that I want to say about this project as well. And the first very small and very subtle change that I want to do is to change the effect that happens when we select some text on the page, okay? So this is just the standard that happens, but I don't really like that. And I always like to add my own personal style and touch to these kind of small details. Okay, so we can change the style of selected text. Okay, and so let's quickly do that. And we can do so here in the base file, okay? So down here, let's just add the selection pseudo element. So selection, and then we can simply change the background color. For example, to the primary color. So the color primary. And then change the text color as well. So color, and then I think this one is called color white. Okay, and we should have our development set up still. Yeah, so it should have reloaded now. And yeah, so this looks much better, right? So whenever the user selects text now, he can see our own personal style applied to that selection. Okay, so I think that looks pretty cool. Now another small thing that I want to change or to fix is something that's considered to be a best practice, and that's in the media queries. Okay, so in here, the media queries work just fine like this, but we should actually add only screen to them. Okay, and what that does is that the media query only gets applied to screens. Okay, so this is basically the first condition, only screen, and then the max width. So for example, if someone tries to print out our page, then these media queries don't apply. Okay, so they only apply to screens. So let's just copy this into all our media queries. All right, and we actually have another one in our header, I believe. So yeah, right here. And we want this applied to all of them, right? All right, so that was another small thing that I wanted to fix. And since we're talking about media queries, there's another thing that I should show you, and that's this piece of code. And this was already in our HTML, so in the starter files that I provided for this project. But we should still not overlook this, because responsive web design does not work without having this meta element here in the HTML head. Because what this does is basically to say that our website should be rendered with the width of the device. So this is here what happens. The width of the content should be the device width. So if we have a device with 500 pixels, then our website should have a width of 500 pixels. And that's of course what we want. But if we do not specify this here in the HTML, then the browser will basically zoom out our page so that the largest possible version of our page fits the screen. So for example, if our widest element, like the row for example, has 1000 pixels, then the browser will try to render the page with a width of 1000 pixels if we didn't have this meta name viewport element in our markup, okay? So whenever you're coding a new page, don't forget to put this part in there, all right? Now another thing about media queries is something that I want to show you here, actually in the inspector, because there's still a problem going on, and that is here with the cards. So remember that for smaller screens, we put that side that was before on the back here in the front so that the user can see the button here without hovering the card, right? And that's because on mobile devices, people cannot really hover. And even if they can, it's not so easy to happen. And so maybe the user could never even see that there is a back part of this card and would then never see this button, okay? And so therefore for the smaller screens, we did it like this because we're assuming that the smaller screens are only for devices where the users cannot hover. Now imagine that we're browsing this page on a huge device like an iPad in landscape mode or like an iPad Pro. Also, whether in portrait mode or in landscape mode. So right now you see that even though we're on a touch device, we cannot see the back part, right? So the user will not hover these cards and will not see the Book Now button that's behind the card. Because again, on a mobile touch device, users do usually not hover. And so what all of that means is that we cannot simply identify a touch device by the width of the screen alone. Okay? But good news is that in CSS, we can actually write a media query which can identify if the user can hover over elements or not. And with that, we can very easily identify touch devices and non-touch devices where we have a mouse. Okay? So let's very quickly implement that. And so we should go to our card element. And so down here we have a media query. And we now want to add another condition to it. Now the problem here is that we used this respond mixin in order to write this media query. And so it's impossible to add a second condition to that media query. So what we have to do here is to actually write out the real media query. So let's get that. So tab port. So that is the media query. So I'm going to remove that or comment it out. And so this is the original media query that we had. So we want all of this to happen when the screen is smaller than 56M, right? But we also want this to happen if we have a touch device, right? And how do we do that? Well, it's actually very simple. So again, we use only screen, and all we have to say is hover none. So the card should be displayed with the back part visible when the screen is smaller than this, or whenever we're using a device where we cannot hover, which basically means whenever we have a device which uses touch as the primary input. Now, if you wanted to do this the other way around, then you could use hover and set it to hover, okay? So that's the opposite of hover none. But in this case, of course, that's what we want. And so now let's reload this entire thing, and you see that now it is actually appearing here, even on this large width, right? Now, in order to have some more control about this testing, we can add here the device type, okay? I know, of course, it's set to mobile because we're on an iPad Pro here, and so that, of course, is a mobile device. Now, if we have an iPad, for example, then it looks like this, or in portrait, like this. But if you go back to responsive, then we can also set this here manually. So, for example, on this huge width here, of course, this should originally be hidden. And so if we set this to desktop, then of course it's gone, right? Because now it's not a touch device. But if we set it to touch or to mobile, then it's back to looking like this. So our media query is actually working just fine. So I hope that made sense to you, okay? So let's now get out of this mode. And okay, so something else that I wanted to talk about with you is this navigation here, okay? So maybe you noticed that when we click here, then nothing really happens, right? And that's because that is something that is not really possible to implement with CSS alone. So if you wanted to really make this functional, so maybe when you click on the button, then it scrolls to the correct section and at the same time closes the navigation. So if you want all of that functionality, then you really have to use JavaScript and not CSS alone, okay? But what I wanted to show you with this is that just with CSS, we can do an amazing effect like this here, and also how to take advantage of the checkbox hack, okay? So I really wanted to show you that, even though the functionality is not 100% there, okay? Now, another thing is down here. Oh, and you see that these icons here are missing, okay? And that is because in the HTML, we already removed that part right here, remember? So let's not worry about this, because once we run our build process, those icons will be back, right? So what I wanted to show you now next is this here. So everything works just fine, but the problem with this is that usually when we have a pop-up effect, when we click outside this area here, then the pop-up should also go away, right? That's the usual behavior of a pop-up, and that's not working right now. But in the real world, this should be another way of closing a pop-up. All right, so once again, for that, you would probably have to use JavaScript and not rely only on CSS. But again, I wanted to show you how you can actually implement something like this in pure CSS and show you how far CSS has become and how advanced it has become in the recent years. Okay, now aside from that, I think this webpage is looking really great. I hope that you did all the challenges, so you made everything really responsive, so all the background images including. And yeah, so this project should basically be ready to launch. Now, just taking a last look at our code, a thing that I didn't do throughout the course was to comment my code, okay? But that's something that in real life you should absolutely do, not only for yourself, so when you come back in the future, you still know how exactly your CSS works, but also for other developers. So imagine you write some CSS and then later someone else has to maintain that CSS, so another developer. Then in order to make his life easier, you should always comment your CSS. So you should definitely write a lot more CSS comments than I did, okay? All I did was like, say, front side styling and some other really basic comments like that. But again, when you write code in the real world, then please make sure that you write a lot of comments always. Now, another thing that we could have done in our project is to use a lot more variables. So basically all the numbers, they could simply be stored in variables. For example, all of the margins. We could have a couple of global variables here in our variable file, and then all the margins could simply depend on these variables. Or for the z-index, you could use them as variables as well. Or maybe all the font sizes. So a lot of variables could be used, and I didn't do that because I wanted to focus more on the CSS part itself and not so much on the Sass part. Okay, but still we did a lot of Sass and of architecture, and I also showed you how you could use variables for all of that. And so therefore I used variables for some of the things just to show you how it works, and then I did other stuff without the variables. Okay, so that we're not always jumping back and forth between files, and simply to make this project a bit more fun to code here in the videos. Okay, and now the very last thing before we leave this video is to actually run our build command one last time, right? So let's do that. And we can finish this process here. And on a Mac, you can do that by hitting Control-C. Okay, so not Command-C, but Control-C. And on Windows, I'm unfortunately not really sure. So probably just open another window, I would say, and close the one which has this process running. Okay, and the process that we want to run now is our, and let's close these, is our package JSON, and it's called build CSS. So npm run build CSS, and letting it do its thing. And all right, so let's take one last look. And now actually it's not working because we canceled the live server, okay? So we have to actually start that again. So npm run start. And so here we go. Now our icons should be back. And yeah, so right now everything is working. And so yeah, that's it. That's the project. I really hope that you enjoyed coding this project as much as I did. I think it was really a lot of fun. And a really cool, beautiful project to learn all of these new skills that you just learned. So once again, congratulations for this achievement. We've come really a long way up until this point. Now, if you want to continue, then next up, I have another very cool project where the main focus is on mastering Flexbox, which is an amazing new way of building layouts. So if you're excited about that, then let's move on together right now, right to the next section. Hope to see you over there.